Alright, so let's see if we can go on where we were here. I believe we were right here. We talked about the different parts of the spine. We had the cervical, which was the first 7 up here in the neck, then the next 12 thoracic, and then the bottom 5 were the lumbar. At the bottom, if you look here in the red, this part next we're going to talk about is the coccyx and the sacrum. Okay, so these are lumbar, and then below the lumbar there's this kind of fused mass. We call this the sacrum. It kind of looks like there would be maybe 5 different vertebrae that were kind of mashed together, kind of melted together. Maybe at one point there were separate vertebrae, but that is the sacrum. Down here is the coccyx. You may refer to that as the tailbone. Maybe it's happened to me before, where I've been walking down the stairs and I've slipped and I skidded on my rear end down the stairs and bruised my tailbone. That usually doesn't happen because most of us have some muscle and fat there to kind of cushion it, but that is our coccyx or tailbone. Maybe at one point it was bigger or it did something. We had talked about this in the past, that maybe these vertebrae, maybe this tailbone were something, and then it kind of went away, kind of evolved in a different way. So staying with the upper body here, we have the humerus, which is the upper part of your bone. We already talked about the clavicle here and the scapula, and connected to the clavicle would be your humerus. One big bone there, one long bone. Then we have below there connected the radius and the ulna. This guy with his thumb to the outside like this is palm up. We call this anatomical position. Well, if you're standing with your arm in anatomical position, your radius is on the outside and your ulna is in the inside. If you flip your hand to your palm down, then those bones are going to switch positions. So we say in anatomical position, the radius is on the outside, and you notice it's connected here, and it's thin. And then as it goes to your wrist, it gets thicker on this end. The ulna starts out thicker here, where it's connected to the humerus, and then slowly gets thinner towards your wrist. So they're kind of opposites. This one goes thin to thick, this one goes thick to thin. And when you turn your hand, they switch positions, they kind of twist, the radius and the ulna. If we just had one bone in our forearm like this, we wouldn't be able to twist our hand. It would be difficult, but because we have 2, they kind of almost work kind of like a scissors motion, where they switch spots. Some of you guys throughout the year have asked me where I got the scar on my right arm. When I was in high school, I broke my radius wrestling. I was wrestling heavyweight, and I had planted my hand on the mat, and basically a 275-pound dude fell on my arm, and I had a spiral fracture of my radius. So basically what happened was my radius twist broke. So when I went to the doctor, they couldn't just put it in a cast and say see ya in 6 weeks or whatever, but instead I had to have surgery where they had to untwist it, line it back up, and then I have a plate and 7 screws in my arm, and they did that so that way it would be set in a position, not move, and it could heal. So now it's all healed up. I never got the plate or the screws out, so I have a radius that's fully healed, as well as a plate and screws, so it should be like double strong. So you got the radius and the ulna. Your carpals are your wrist bones. Your carpals are basically like little weird shaped pebbles in your wrist that kind of glide over each other. A lot of us can like move our wrist and kind of get it to like crick or crack, or you can kind of feel it grind in there. Okay, you're feeling your carpals kind of slide over each other. and sometimes it's not perfect. They might kind of catch a little bit, and that's why you might be able to click your wrist or something like that. But your carpals are your wrist bone. Your metacarpals are your bones in your hand, like in the palm of your hand. So carpals wrist, metacarpals would be your hand bones, and then your phalanges would be your finger bones, or your last 3 bones in your fingers, last 2 in your thumb, as you see there. So we have carpals, metacarpals here, and then phalanges here. As we move on, we got the rib cage here. Okay, a rib cage is important because it protects a bunch of stuff on the inside, our heart and our lungs being the important ones. We also have this sternum right here, which is bone, and most of your rib cage is bone, but there is some cartilage. You'll notice that we got bone here, bone in our sternum, but then it connects with cartilage. And the reason for that is because when we inhale, our lungs expand, and when they expand, our chest needs to expand, so our rib cage needs to expand. So you have that flexible cartilage to allow that to expand. When we exhale, then it contracts, so it needs to be able to stretch. So that's why we have this cartilage connecting this bone of our rib cage with our sternum. So it's important that we have that cartilage. I had a kid in my elementary class when I was a kid that was born without part of this sternum. He had this part there, and then this middle part it just didn't develop. So he had nothing there, and he had like a little indent in his chest. It kind of looked like a bowl, like you could pour soup or cereal or something in it. And then in about, maybe it was 3rd grade, he had surgery where they took bone, they grafted bone off of his hip, off of his pelvis, and they made a sternum, and they filled this all in. But I remember up until then, he couldn't play at recess. He couldn't play basketball or baseball or anything like that, because he basically had kind of a weak spot here, where excuse me, where if he got hit there or something, he didn't have a lot of protection between his heart and his lungs and stuff. So I'm not sure why they had to wait maybe they had to wait till he was so big so they could do that. But after his surgery, then he looked normal. He had a little scar, but other than that, he looked normal, and everything was good. So your sternum is in the middle there. Your pelvis is, as we go down to the bottom part, your pelvis would be this kind of funky shape here. This would be where your lumbar are. Then we have the sacrum, the coccyx, your tailbone here. This would be your pelvis. You kind of have they call this the pelvic girdle. Your femur is basically from your hip to your knee. It's one long bone. It's your longest bone. It's I read somewhere that is stronger than concrete, which is kind of crazy. But if you break your femur, it usually means you were in a really bad car wreck or had a really bad accident. People don't just break their femurs easily. Below the femur, then, we have the tibia and the fibula. Actually, first we have the patella, which is your kneecap. It's your bone on your kneecap, and it's held there by tendons and ligaments. Just in the last couple of years in football and wrestling, we've had kids' patella, that their kneecap basically get popped out of place. Basically, they had some tendons that were loose, and it caused it to move. They got hit right or whatever, and it moved. And Aaron, the trainer, had to pop it back in, and they had to do some rehab and surgery and stuff like that. But anyways, we have the tibia and fibula, The tibia is the big one. If you ever hit your shin on something and it hurt, that's your tibia, your big bone here. Your fibula is the little skinny one next to it. Most of the time when someone breaks a leg, it's usually their fibula. It's because it's small, and it's I've heard of people breaking their leg and not even like realizing it, because your tibia, the big one, is the one that carries most of the weight. If you break your tibia, you probably broke your fibula also, because if you were playing sports or in a car wreck and the force was able to break this, it's probably going to break the small one as well. And if you break both of those, then it's usually a pretty big deal. But keep tibia and fibula separate. A lot of people mix those up and will say tibula or fibia. It's tibia is the big one, fibula is the small one. Your tarsals are your ankle bones. It's just like your carpals. You have a bunch of small kind of pebble rock like bones that kind of glide over each other. Most of us can wiggle our ankles a certain way where it'll kind of click. I know when I walk, my right ankle clicks sometimes. I have tarsals that kind of glide over each other there. So that happens. Metatarsals would be your feet bones here. You got 5 of those. I've heard of people who are born with a mutation type thing. Tomorrow we're going to talk about joints